Okay. Hello, everybody. Hello and welcome. On behalf of the Mayor's Cultural Leadership Board, as Vice Chair, I'd like to welcome you to City Hall and the new home for the Mayor and the London Assembly in East London. For all those people who are still going to the other building, don't go there anymore. We're delighted that City Hall is partnering with the Genesis Foundation to host this event, which we hope will be the first of many more to come. The regeneration of East London is a hot topic, not only very close to the hearts of the ambassadors on the board and being the home to the new City Hall, but significantly an area the Mayor is investing in heavily, including new housing, the Royal Docks, and of course East Bank as part of the legacy of the 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games. And it has been the biggest cultural investment since the Great Exhibition in 1851, which I think is phenomenal. Someone who was also big on placemaking, particularly, who deserves mention tonight, was my fellow board member, Pam Alexander OBE, who sadly passed away earlier this year. And we want to remember her, as she, as with most of us in the room, believed very strongly that the arts and culture have an incredible power to change lives and transform communities, and that it plays a vital role in shaping our city and building a better London for all, and that the story of creativity is the story of London. A huge thank you to Genesis Foundation for co-producing this event, and it's wonderful to see such a range of people from the cultural sector and creative industries passionate about joining the conversation about the development of East London. I'm sure tonight will spark some very interesting discussions from very different voices across East London about how to make positive changes and put community at the heart of this story now and in the future. So I am born and raised in Newham. I could get granular and go, I'm a Gate Ute, for those who know, Forest Gate, born and bred. So I have particular skin in the game, but we all do, as residents, as inhabitants, as makers. So I'm up for the conversation. I'd like to welcome the panel to the table while I slip on my Mayor of London hat off, cultural leadership hat off, and join the panel as a member of the conversation. So come on up and welcome everybody. Thank you.
Well, hello and good evening, everyone, and welcome to Genesis Conversations, as if you've already been welcomed in partnership with the Greater London Authority. My name is Brenda Emmanus, and with our esteemed panel of cultural leaders, we will explore the role of art and culture in placemaking and regeneration. Now, placemaking is widely understood to describe the ways in which local partners collectively use their influence, their creativity, and of course their skills to create attractive, prosperous, and safe communities, places where people want to live, places where people want to work. Now, the ambition and the vision, I guess, is to stimulate local economies and lead to an increased innovation, cultural diversity, and civic engagement, all those wonderful things that we as cultural leaders, or you as cultural leaders, I'm just steering the ship, all aspire to. So how can the cultural and creative regeneration of East London be a force for positive change without alienating the local communities? Well, to discuss this with me and more are, as said, my esteemed panel. So let me introduce you to them. We have Sanaz Amidi, CEO of Rosetta Arts, Dr. Gus Casely-Hayford, OBE, Director of V&A East, Amanda Parker, who you've already met, Vice Chair of the Mayor's Cultural Leadership Board, and Bob and Roberta Smith, East London-based artists. And of course, we have you, and you listening online, who will hopefully, we hope, be part of this conversation. Now, there's a lot of learning to be had from the Olympics and how that legacy of regeneration of the Olympic Park and the surrounding areas, there have been good and bad things, which we could talk about. Why are you? I don't know. Oh, my God, Nadia.
Save the best for
We've
last.
spent so much time talking backstage. I forgot you've just blended into me. Do forgive me. Nadia Falls, Theatre Royal Stratford East. I'm so sorry, darling. Am I forgiven?
Yeah.
All right, we move on. We move on swiftly. Good job I'm black, I don't blush. Anyway, let's carry on with the conversation. As I mentioned, there are a lot of lessons to be learned, and we could spend the whole hour looking at what went wrong, but the whole idea now is to look at how the East Bank, which is hoping to build a positive legacy, and this opportunity, we're here to discuss how we get it right. What will it take to make it sort of a role model example of what regeneration can and look like, with people at the centre of it all? So, Amanda, you mentioned that you were East London born and bred, so you've obviously seen the evolution of the borough of Newham. So let's talk about that first, what it felt like to be part of it, to see it as a cultural leader, but also, more importantly, as a member of the community in that borough.
So as a member of the community, I was in Hackney pre-Olympic bid, and we were not uniformly positive about the Olympics coming in. There was some really strong support, there was some really strong negative sentiment around it. I come back to this space some 20, 30, 40 years later, and there are some pockets of East London that I'm just like, crikey, I don't even recognise it. It's amazing. Canning Town Station is amazing. I cannot believe what I grew up with and what it looks like now. It's got huge energy. There are pockets that are bits that I really know and resonate and have always been here, and that's really important. Theatre Royal Stratford East, seeing it grow from being a theatre to a community hub to a voice for young people has been phenomenal. Rosetta, as I was saying to Sanaz, was a kind of twinkle in the eye when I was a keen ex-year-old ballet girl, but now it is a phenomenal, totally ingrained offer that is community and culture at the heart. So that, to me, is incredible, that we've had loads of commercial change, business change, the landscape's changed, but the bits of Newham that I recognise and love, that radical, collaborative action, that make it and do, the innovation that Theatre Royal Stratford speaks so specifically to, is phenomenal for me to see and really exciting, notwithstanding all the challenges to come.
And why do you think that resistance was? Was it because the community felt they weren't engaged in the process?
I think that Newham has amazing lessons to share with most other boroughs, if not most other areas in the country, when it comes to collaboration. You know, if Newham can't get it right, nobody can get it right. After the legacy of how we brought volunteers into the Olympics, how that consultation process went, but why, coming back to your why, because there were communities that would be displaced, because there were fears around the very issues we're talking around tonight, about who is brought in and who is moved away. So we could see that, but what we couldn't see was how would that transform the space some years down? How would that shape the nature of the space some years down the line? What we could see was, oh my God, the traveller community, where are they going to go? Oh my God, Hackney Marshes, is it going to still survive? You know, it was quite practical stuff. We weren't the people who had the vision. And I think good consultation, good collaboration helps people imagine on the way, helps you build that picture. So it was very early on in the journey.
Now, there's so much that you could deep dive about and dissect about the whole process of regeneration. And we're talking particularly exploring the role of art and culture in placemaking. Now, I remember when I was Arts, Culture and Entertainment correspondent for BBC, one of the highlights of my career was a cultural Olympiad. This opened my eyes to just the potential of artists and communities equally being engaged in what a city, what their place could look like, what role they can play. That was really exciting for me, but I didn't live in East London, so I was an observer as well as a professional participant. Girl, but it was a buzz. It was a real buzz. Yeah. And did it feel like that? Do you think that's important? Do you think? And maybe I could put that to Bob. Do you think are you excited by the proposition of East Bank and what it can bring? Do you think artists do have a role and should play a role early in terms of regeneration?
Yes, at all levels. Yes, at all levels, artists should be involved. I mean, I think it is interesting. I mean, I was invited to do a proposal for the Cultural Olympiad via Resonance FM, but previous to that, I'd met this amazing North Korean a South Korean artist called Namjoon Paik, and I'd done an interview with him, and he said to me, collective ego is a very bad thing. So when I was invited to do something at the Olympics, I came up with this project, which was the antidote to joyousness. So we were going to make a large hell pit, a circle in the ground, and everybody from Resonance FM, who are all sound artists, they were going to make a screaming, hellish sound. It would be surrounded by barbed wire. You would get close to it and you would just see this dark abyss with these screaming voices coming out of it. And we didn't hear back from the mayor's office. Imagine my surprise then when I was invited not to make a proposal, but I was one of the artists invited to make a poster for the Paralympics. I suppose by that time I'd kind of grown up a little bit. And I realised it was a great honour to make something for the Paralympics. And it was extraordinary. At the end of the Paralympics, I had this poster, and I went down to the Olympic Village, because I live on the edge of it. And I asked the Paralympians who were around to sign the poster, not realising that very few Paralympians would sign it with their hands. So I had this amazing poster, which is signed by all these people from all over the world in extraordinary ways. And it was very, very moving and powerful sort of experience. And later I then made a film called Who is Community, which was a lot of the imagery from it, and the film was on the Stratford station during the Olympics. And it was meditating on this idea that Pierre de Coubertin, who came up with the Olympic ideal because he thought that nations were better competing with each other in sporting events rather than fighting because of his experience in the Franco-Prussian War, he would fall in love in a public space on the Central Line with Hannah Arendt. And Hannah Arendt thought that public space was a meeting place between the public and private, and they would fall in love. But, of course, they wouldn't be able to fall in love because they lived in completely different times. This very esoteric, crazy film was on show during the Olympics in the station at Stratford. And in a way, that film, I was looking at it this afternoon, I was thinking, well, that's really naive, thinking about what happened, with the whole Olympic legacy and how things have developed. But really, this evening, in this space, this is a democratic space. This is a space where we have the responsibility in the arts to talk about people and places and democracy and think about a future generation. My generation, we would have gone to the RFT. I saw the South Bank being built. I saw the flurry of galleries built around the country in 2000, Tate Modern. This is the new enterprise for the 21st century. And my God, it is our responsibility to the future generations, we're in future London here, to get it right.
So bearing in mind, Amanda talked about a radical history here in Newham. How radical does the approach or the proposition have to be to get it right? You're sitting next to me, Gus, you better take that question.
Well, I think, as Bob and Amanda have said, that this is a generational opportunity that we cannot, and more than that, one looks at what we've been through over the past kind of handful of years of being tested by a pandemic, but also kind of thinking about post-Brexit, but also the way in which the culture wars have been kind of quite divisive amongst many communities. And the arts, it's an area that I've worked in my entire career, and so often kind of politicians that they see it as something which is nice, but generally unimportant and not necessarily something that they can quantify the use of in ways that are useful for them on the doorstep. But you could see during this period in which we felt incredibly tested, the spaces within which we might come together have been really kind of sought out. The ways in which we could communicate and find the spaces for dignity and to be uplifted have been really craved by many people. And that sense of the public-funded arts as being a necessity has felt, at least to me, to be, palpable. And the reasons why I do and value the things that that my colleagues are engaged in, particularly in kind of areas like museums, it really did kind of strike me that this is a time for us to actually redouble our efforts. I mean, Amanda began by talking about that this being the biggest investment since the 1850s, since the Great Exhibition. And in that period, well, Dickens, the great Punch cartoonist Henry Mayhew, they go to the Great Exhibition and they see this vision for not just a future Britain, but also for a world within which there is, far greater cultural exchange, in which we find kind of opportunities for uplift, but also opportunities for collaboration through the arts that could be truly transformative. And Henry Mayhew, who's a Punch cartoonist, he's really inspired by what he sees, and he wants to find out where are the points of inspiration for this energy. So he comes east. He comes to this very area in search of the creative people who are driving this moment of transformation in Britain. And he describes this area as a place which has been deeply underserved by the political classes, but which, despite all of its challenges, is full of creatives who are doing amazing things, transformative things. Dickens follows him a few months later, and he walks in this area. He's someone who wakes up very early and he would walk for miles. And he walks through this area and he describes it as a place of incredible deprivation and huge challenge, but of immense creativity. And when I was doing a job in Washington, D.C. before I took on this role, and for me, it was that sense of how do we give back to those people who've given so much to Britain by way of creative energy over generations? How do we reinvest in them, create an Olympic legacy which is worthy of their contribution?
Right, well, let me ask you that, because for a journalist, a major investment like that is a very sexy headline, as is our world-class institutions moving into the area, like Sadler's Wells, like the BBC, like yourselves, the V&A East. So that said, you're here now. We don't have Dickens, we have Dr. Gus. What for you are the priorities as the V&A in terms of doing what you're saying we need to do?
Well, it has to be an investment in the local population, in their skills, in their aspirations, in inspiring them, both in terms of emotional uplift, but also in giving them the kind of the practical tools with which to transform their own lives. And so one of the things we've been really keen on is in hearing what they would like. And so over the course of the development of this project, we've spoken to 22,000 people at every single stage of development, thinking about how we fashion our broader vision, how we nuance every single stage and make sure that what we are delivering is actually kind of in tune with what they need, but also that we are nuancing it as we go. I mean, the pandemic has changed a lot of people's views of what the arts might be and how they might actually kind of help them. And so we've had to nuance and change our vision appropriately. And so we have engaged continually, and even now I have made a commitment myself to visit every single school in the 4 boroughs that surround us, more than 100 schools, to spend face-to-face time with more than 100,000 young people, taking our objects into those communities, talking about what's coming, and engaging with them, hopefully, and bringing about that understanding that these are your collections, your institutions, as complex, as difficult, as contested as it is, these are our British histories. And if you want us to present them in ways that you feel tell your stories are appropriate to you with all of the complexity and dissonance, please get involved. And we've had a huge amount of positive energy that has been volunteered, and we are so grateful. And I want to see that beyond the point of opening, that we become an open, democratized interface for local people to engage with, to be inspired, but also to find transformative opportunity.
But with us we have Nadia and Sanaz. You've been engaged with local communities. You work on a very hyper-local level. What's your thinking on this? You've got these shiny new buildings appearing, which we want to obviously excite people and offers potential. What do you see as your roles as arts institutions that have been embedded in the communities for so long?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, we could both talk about this till the cows come home. I feel a bit like Charles Dickens, because when you exit Stratford station, you see everyone. A microcosm of the entire world is on that concourse, you know. Religious preachers, hip-hop dancers, students, shoppers to Westfield, shoppers to the other side. The market it's lifeblood, and as an artist, it's like you're in and amongst stories, and that's what's exciting. And as an artist, new spaces, new cultural and artistic spaces is exciting, but we're almost 140 years old as a theatre, and we're very much embedded in the community. And the worst case scenario would be that there is a kind of line in the sand between the community, the old town, and the shiny new building. And so we've got to work really hard on a real grassroots level to hold hands. And, you know, organisations such as yours, we've been there for a long time. Those relationships are old, and they're worked on, you know, daily, weekly, monthly. So I really hope that it's a real partnership. And that's hard work. That's really hard work. And it's got to happen before the keys are turned, I think. I don't know how you feel about it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what you've said resonates with me, and also what Amanda said, because I've been leading Rosetta Arts for 16 years. And I remember those early stages about Westfields and about the Olympic Park, and it just seemed so radical that you needed radical approaches for it to work. And I remember that old town and new town conversation, but if I remember right, actually since Westfield has been there, the footfall in the old town has increased exponentially. So I think that's a really good example of how when we embrace the new and we think about it as an asset for the community, we can really start to utilise it in the right way. This panel is called People Make Places. People come before places. So you can have the shiniest buildings in the world, but it won't mean anything unless you have the right people in there. And if they're not representative of the communities in which we're trying to reach, it won't work. So, you know, since 2018, a group of us came together, some of which were East Bank partners, some of the old, some of the new, some of the incoming. And we came together around the Creative People and Places bid. And during that process, we were unsuccessful in the first bid to the Arts Council in 2019. And everyone around the table, on decision day, when we found out that we'd failed, said, this cannot stop. This is amazing. We're starting to talk together. We're collaborating. We're connecting. We're networking. We're having conversations that we haven't had before. And that's how, back in August, September 2019, Creative Newham was born. Creative Newham is now an alliance of almost 70 organisations, all of which are in Newham or coming to Newham, and has a vision around improving cultural mobility in Newham. And that bid, the name, comes from the Creative People and Places bid. And the reason why we came together, because it was something that we could not do on our own. And this is really important, that we recognise that it doesn't matter how big or small you are, there are just some things that you cannot do unless you work together.
Does that mean working with the likes of the V&A and Sadler as well? So you're talking about working more collaboratively, deeper down, like with the local communities and the policymakers and the councils? Is that
all
everybody?
of them? Yes. So if you look at Creative Newham, we have representation from central and local government, and we have representation from all the East Bank partners, as well as all the NPOs and many other small and micro organisations. But let's not forget, the small and micro, medium organisations represent 95% of this ecosystem here. So they're the ones with actually the biggest voices, because they're the ones that are really covering the work. And I remember back in 2018 when we started the process for Creative People and Places, everyone referred to Newham as a cultural desert.
How rude. Yeah. Have they not been to Newham?
Exactly.
It's got the highest faith.
There is so much happening here, but sometimes it's not recognised. It's not recognised by the mainstream. It's not recognised by popular culture in the way that is speaking loudly and in large volumes. But it's there. It's happening. You're just not recognising it. And that's why you're calling Newham a cultural desert.
And it's something about the marginalisation of the people here that means that what's going on can't be seen, even when it's going on in grand style.
And it's not being valued.
Absolutely.
And that's what it's about. But just to finish my story, we did secure £1.8 million from the Arts Council for CPP in 22. And one of the things that we learnt during those 4 years working together is that we really need to think about who holds the money in a consortium bid like that, because money is power, and we have to be honest about that. So whilst Rosetta Arts led the bid for Creative People and Places, we made a decision that we should not be holding the money. So we set up a consortium and handed everything over to Community Links, which is an embedded community organisation, and they should be the ones that are making those decisions along with the community and with partners like UEL and others. So, I think there's also something there about when we talk about cultural placemaking or art placemaking, we also have to have an honest conversation about where the money lies.
So who wants to continue? So where does the money lie and how do we change how that money is distributed? Is that equally important as sitting here saying, look, we should all be working collaboratively together?
So I'm a bit excited about this because what you've just talked about touches on what you've just talked about and what you've just said. Joan Littlewood and what she did at Theatre Royal Stratford East all those years ago, democratising what we call culture, going to people, you don't need a building to make art, just go and do it and make your own thing. She radically changed, and that's the radicalism in Newham that I think is so exciting. And I think there are seeds of it in the way Newham local authority is looking after that money and trying to disperse differently, because we know we have the community infrastructure levy. Some people know the community infrastructure levy. Not enough people know about the community infrastructure levy, but there are systems in place that go for small and large creatives to make the most of this space. There are pockets of money for you to go for. Equally with consultation, Newham is doing really interesting things about how it consults with its residents. They've got mad schemes of long-form consultation, ways you can drop in on it. And it sounds really dull, but it is so important to keep that dialogue with people. But also as part of that dialogue, there are pockets of cash for people to access to realise their dreams and interpret it in a cultural way, just like Joan Littlewood did all those many years ago. That's the radical bit that I find really exciting, but I also want to go further with that. I get really ridiculously excited at the idea of, we've got the levy, there is a pocket of money if you are a developer that should be or can be invested into creative spaces. Great, but wouldn't it be amazing if all of the businesses in Westfield and elsewhere had some kind of tax or levy, a cultural tax or levy, nothing to do with their commercial offer, but to go, you're here because we are bringing footfall, you're here because the space is looking cool because of all the stuff that's going on around it. So how about invest in that? And it's those conversations that I feel very confident that Newham can have, because we've got quite arsey people in the space, but also because people are creative and think very differently, because they've come from communities where they do all sorts of sharing, power sharing. It's already embedded in faith groups, in community groups, in different practices, and it just needs the artist to join that, link it up, and pull that money from commercials.
Then who can make that policy work, who can impose what you're saying? Because doesn't that fall back to government, local and otherwise? And therefore, if I hear leaders like yourself saying all the time, it's not a priority, culture and art's not a priority for government at the moment. So do you need to persuade them too of the value of art, and therefore to impose, to create these?
I think it's two-way. Personally, I think it's two-way, because for every statement where artists and creatives say we are not a priority and we should be, I also look at that and go, how and where are we involving ourselves in the dialogues that seem to matter to people? Where's our voice in the conversation about housing and social housing in Newham? Where's the creative voice in conversations about health? We've got a narrative that we can share. Social prescribing is there, it's already, but are creatives joining that narrative for local people to understand that we are not just with them around the edges, but we're absolutely invested in the things that they care about. So I think it's two-way. I don't think it's just government isn't doing, policy isn't doing. I think it's also creatives can do something very differently by investing themselves and embedding themselves in conversations about education, housing, healthcare, environment. All of those things, we could be doing that.
I think, Sanaz, I think it was you who brought that point here. We're having a casual conversation which was touching on this, really, because we were talking about when you're worried about paying your bills and you're worried about getting your food through school and food, sometimes arts and culture can feel like a lesser priority even for you. And I think it was you that mentioned, maybe perhaps which is Amanda's implying, the language, because you don't talk about arts and culture. You talk about dance and music and the difference it can make and the values it can make. I'm sure it was you that mentioned this to me in the conversation.
Yeah, I think, cross-sector collaboration is everything. And we could also talk about how we collaborate with both big cultural organisations, but health, housing, education, the universities. We have some prominent universities here in the borough as well. And I think until we realise that people's value systems are different. So what we maybe sometimes promote or preach in the arts may not necessarily always align with other people's values or be recognised. And we need to recognise that, so at Rosetta, there's a big portfolio or stock of our work where we don't actually even mention the word art. We talk about the things, the values, the valuable things that they'll get from engaging. So it'd be come and meet someone new, come and learn something new, come and get fed, come and open up opportunities to earn. It's those sorts of conversations that we try to have, particularly in our area of work, where we are meeting people where they've had very little engagement with arts and cultural services.
We mentioned earlier as well about part of the success of placemaking is making people feel that they have safe spaces and spaces that are theirs, that they own. Now, in the conversation earlier, we were talking about safe spaces. Nadia, we'll come to you for this because you tried to create a safe space recently and there's been a backlash and you tried to create a safe space for your audience. Do you think creating these spaces, taking this radical approach to regeneration and otherwise, as a cultural leader trying to, do things differently, does take risks? It means you can't, I guess, what's that saying? You can't make an omelette without smashing an egg?
Well, I think as a civic space, we know our area, we know our community. Newham is one of the most diverse boroughs in the UK. I think 69% global majority. It's also a very, very young borough. And so we have 4 youth theatres, we have so much grassroots stuff. So we don't intellectualise about the power of art. We just get in there And we get stuck in there, either by the plays we put on, the youth groups, the professional training, we live it. And so I think people that we engage with absolutely get community and well-being out of it. They don't write papers about it necessarily, but they're living it. But yeah, theatre is risk, and I think you're referring to
blackout.
the media storm
that
we've enjoyed not over the last couple of weeks, because we've got a play coming on, a Black American play, which is a satire. And as the play is on for a month, the artist came to us and said, we'd really like to do a thing called a blackout night. And they've been done across London at the Almeida Theatre, the Gate Theatre, the Lyric are about to do it. And it's a night where you invite a black audience to come together in community and experience the play, which is around themes, quite complex themes, around race and what it is to be black and so on and so forth. And so somehow we get caught up in a media storm because the Sunday Telegraph decides that we're throwing white people out of the theatre. They quickly corrected that title, but the damage was done. So we had all sorts of things, trolling, mail, and there was a bit of a cultural war going on around Theatre Royal Stratford East and this blackout night. And it gets quite dark, actually. It gets quite mean and scary and hate maily, and horrible stuff has transpired since. But yeah, so sometimes theatre is risk, but we know our community. The kind of anti-blackout night came not from our audiences, really, not from Newham, not from our community, but people that decided that a left-leaning theatre that was holding this performance was too woke for them. And we got singled out. I mean, the Lyric are about to do a blackout night, no social media, no media around that event. The Almeida Theatre did it twice, no social media, no, there was an article by the Telegraph pro their blackout night. So we can discuss what's going on, but we know our community, and we're experts as cultural buildings around engaging, because we're nothing without the community. Buildings, as you say, are buildings, especially new buildings. I remember Alan Bennett saying when the National Theatre moved into the South Bank, it was all new and shiny, and it needed to be worn in by plays and people and get grubby, and that's when art happens. So we need people to go into these new buildings, and they better be coming from Newham as well as coming in for a destination, because it's no good if they're all coming in from Highbury and Islington.
Bob, do you have anything to say on this? Do you have any concerns about what could not possibly go wrong? Because I think we're trying to remain positive. We're being Pollyanna about how it could work. But do you think there's things we should be mindful of when we're thinking about regeneration? I mean, you work. Your work is embedded in communities and education, but you do work with those major institutions. So you're at the table when discussions are being had.
Well, in this conversation, I'm really just a kind of bystander, really. I mean, I'm not delivering anything, so I don't have any of these problems. But I mean, I can make a couple of observations. I mean, or one as an audience member is how things are done quite tacitly, which can be quite positive, actually. So my son was a member of the, sounds a bit frightening, this, but he was a member of the Olympic Legacy Youth Voice. And what that was a group of kids who are interested in architecture, being involved, all the way through in conversations about what the East Bank would look like. So it was my 16-year-old, no, it was my, I don't know how old it was, 18-year-old son who told me about the V&A coming, just down the end of our road, basically. And actually, he was in this youth voice with a very diverse group of students, and he's just graduated from the Bartlett doing architecture. So there are these kind of tacit ways in which education projects are already working to shape the conversations of the future. One of his best pals was a young black woman who then went to the Bartlett and actually realised that the Bartlett had its own problems And so she was part of a conversation which meant that Bartlett had to completely restructure its whole thing. Well, that kind of, some of those conversations come out of this legacy youth voice kind of thing, thinking about the diversity, who builds London and what those conversations are about. But my note of caution is that I also, as a day job, I'm a professor at London Metropolitan University. And as institutions, we were sited right opposite the Whitechapel. But actually, the amount of conversation that we have with the Whitechapel is pretty minimal over all that time. And it's because the Whitechapel's doing its thing, we were doing our thing, and actually to make those collaborations, to deliver education projects, to deliver the legacy youth voice, it costs money. And that money is different from capital money to build museums. Donors love their names on buildings, but they don't pay the wages of education projects. They don't pay the wages of the people running the legacy youth voice. And so that's what I would sort of urge to come out of this kind of conversations, is to say it doesn't stop with the buildings being built. Funders have to put money in to make all this happen. Otherwise, it won't happen because people are so busy delivering what they conceive of. But I agree with everybody that the buck is much bigger if you can join forces somehow.
And there's some really canny, if you don't mind me jumping in, there's some really canny thinking that I think is worth thinking about in this space around Barking's film development. So we're going back possibly a decade now, where Barking Council leader looked at his community and said, we used to have a car plant. We don't have that now, but we've got this massive space that we can do something with. And we've got a legacy, we've got a history of people rolling up their sleeves and doing stuff. Our community are people who are makers, right? And he's taken the development of Barking Film Studios, but he's been so canny with his engagement, with skills, with education, and he's gone, right, so the local hairdressing training centre, we need to get you ready for film. You're going to be the future of hair and makeup when film comes to Barking. It's been 10, 15 years in fruition. He's done the same thing around electricians. You've got loads of areas, working class areas, where you're brought up and you're taught, are you going to be a plumber or are you going to be an electrician so that you can earn your money forever? And he's put that together with thinking about how do those skills serve the creative and cultural sector, and how can I hardwire that thinking into those young people who are not looking at university, who are not that interested, maybe not even interested in a creative career. And that's what I mean, that we need to be a bit canny about the conversations that go on in the big employers, the V&A and what have you. It's fantastic. I'm so excited that you're going to go to every school. I think that's fantastic. And I hope that the conversation is going to be about not just you can be a curator, but actually here are the skills around maintaining these buildings, administering these buildings, accountancy around this. Barking is a really good model of what we might do when we marry conversations about culture with conversations about skill set and learning and education, which was my point earlier, to go, let's not keep this in a creative conversation space. We need to deploy culture to the needs, in this case employment, of the communities we're in.
And we do that. And, in theatre, there's been a mass frightening exodus post-pandemic of 1 in 3 freelancers leaving the industry. So we're not just talking about choreographers, directors and actors, we're talking about set builders, technicians, people that build a set. They've all, 1 in 3 have left the industry because they couldn't survive within it. And we're trying to do lots of things like young technicians to skill up, because it's, there's jobs out there. But what is frightening, and I'm really excited about the opportunity of, I'm not a naysayer to any of this development, but what is frightening is at a time where, there's a very smaller pots of money and everybody looking at the same pot with regards to philanthropy in the arts, that we're all going for the same pot, and that's what frightens me.
Crabs in the barrel, as it were.
So, sorry to say it out loud.
I mean, I'm getting very excited about the potential, and potential, I think, as a Jan Van Zandt, I think so said, means you ain't doing nothing now. And that's not because everybody's busy doing their thing. So how do we get to the stage? Because the reality is, when you start running your buildings, you're going to be busy. There's lots of priorities. There's keeping it open. There's paying the bills. There's all of that. You all have that on a practical, realistic level. How are we going to move from you keeping yourselves afloat and then you all collaborating and working collectively for the greater good of the borough?
I think the underpinning and connective tissue between what everyone is aspiring to are also the terms within which the whole East Bank endeavour was actually founded. And each one of the constituent partners on the East Bank Park have their funding underwritten by an acceptance that these things are our priority and the metrics against which we will measure our success. So, you know, I've visited a number of the cities, the Olympic legacy cities, and they have made promises to communities. But the shape and the aspiration of what we are trying to do here, I think, is more radical, and I think it fills me with such hope, you know, both in terms of its practicality, but also in terms of the way in which we are working together. And I don't mean just the key partners, but all of those partners are trying to draw a variety of different kinds of institution into their into their partnership groups to try to find ways of collaborating better, to deliver better. And that has been transformative, not just in terms of what we can do, but the way in which we can do it. And so I feel, I was living in the US when I heard about this job, and this was the component bit of the job description that really attracted me to come home, of doing something. And the arts, of course, it's uplifting and it's glorious what we do, what we get to do. But the truly transformative component of it, the way in which we can draw peoples and communities together, the way in which we can transform lives, I think that is the bit that really got me about the East Bank. Not just constituent institutions, but as an East Bank proposition to change the nature of an area and also think about the way in which the arts disciplines can actually play a formal role. And one looks at politicians and the way they marginalise the arts, the way in which they talk about the arts as something which is nice but not necessarily key and core to future dynamic delivery. And what East Bank has the potential to do is, I think, to reformulate that. And it's wonderful that the mayor has absolutely got that, and as a politician is running really kind of hard to make sure that people recognise that the arts are part of his vision for transforming London. And we want national politics to get behind the arts in the same way. This is a real chance for us, not just in terms of the lives we can transform, but the way in which we can change the narrative.
So politicians, yes, but we're talking here about people making places. Now, when naively, outside this, I'm just the observer, when I think about regeneration, I'm thinking the policy makers, I'm thinking local government and wider government, etc. People seem to come last in the decisions and what they want, you know. There's like culture in some sense was in the past particularly imposed on them and they were part of it. At what stage or how are you making sure that your communities in particular feel that they're part of what's going on here, that they have a say, they say what they want and what they need, not this is what we think is really exciting, you're going to come along for the ride?
I mean, we've been there a long time, so maybe the other... But I this might sound like a frivolous point, but I think the only way things can work through arts buildings is through the art. So I think we can talk till the cows come home, but if there's art to get our teeth into, that's how we can collaborate as organisations and with people. So do the artistic endeavour, and through that change and collaboration will come, because it's not an academic exercise. Yeah. That's my tuppence.
And I agree with that. And our first exhibition is, I can't reveal what it actually is at the moment because
do it.
But,
come on.
But we've thought of something which will draw all the partners across the park together into a single collaboration, and it's glorious to work with Sadler's Wells, to work with the BBC, to work with LCF, UCL on delivering something that will kind of speak, I think, to the power of that core partnership, but then to also then include a whole kind of wider consortium of community-focused groups in actually making sure that this really kind of, speaks to the local people of Newham. I mean, the potential of East Bank just absolutely kind of thrills me, and I've recognised that there's a lot to feel cynical about because of so many times in which we've that similar projects have not delivered. But I have not worked on something where there's been such concerted, absolute commitment to making sure that this actually makes a difference. And post-pandemic, post-Brexit, people are so desperate for something that will kind of, shine a light on what a positive cultural future might look like. And I pray that this can create some momentum toward that.
If that happens, you just call it Nirvana Arts, because that would be bloody amazing, wouldn't it? Go on, Bob, you're good.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, I'm totally pro East Bank. I think it's going to be very exciting. But really, if we wanted to excite the children of Newham in the arts, we would get rid, and we would force Sadiq Khan to be the leader of this, to get rid of the EBAC. Because it's the EBAC which means that there have been 40% less children studying the art GCSE. Yeah. The musicians are up in arms because they're not going to have anybody playing the violin to play in the orchestras in the future. Drama teachers are up in arms. There are 30% less children now doing the art A level. Yeah. If we're serious about delivering to every school, those 100 schools in this borough, we will say, we'll get rid of the EBAC, we want to hear those kids' voices, and we'll say, we're not going to bring you something to your school, you're going to make something for our museum, and we're going to display it, and you're going to come and see it. Because it needs that kind of depth to change things. Building a museum won't do it. But actually changing the structure in which the arts are seen as all of our voices, that will do it. So that's what Labour Party policy has to be in the new government. That's one of the things that needs to happen.
Well, that's good, because my final question, because we're running out of time, was to ask you, we talked about regeneration, for it to work, we need communication, consultation and collaboration between local communities and stakeholders. My question was going to be, to sum up, tell me the one big thing you think Newham needs to do to get it right, or we need to do to make it right. I think, Bob, you've answered, so I'm going to let you off on that one. Amanda?
I'm really struck by, and I can't remember the statistic, but Newham has a huge number, something like 80% of businesses are small and medium enterprises and micro businesses. All of those people who are aspirational and hustle, how are we plugging them into the big organisations? I would like the big organisations to make an absolute explicit commitment that all of their contracted services will be local. All of those SMEs and micro businesses will be employed or deployed by the V&A and Sadler's Wells and all the other big buildings.
Can I just add something to that before you get Gus's...
Is this your one big thing?
Yeah, Gus.
Is this your one big thing?
The talent pool needs to exist. So the talent is here. But there needs to be a much bigger investment on the skills and training journey so that you can access that talent pool. So unfortunately, the egg has to come before the chicken, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
But the beauty of East Bank is that we have around us some really kind of committed teachers working in some great schools which are underfunded. But if we can get, particularly in the arts areas, that funding kind of absolutely assured, we can then link that into the sorts of courses that are being developed across those tertiary-focused institutions who are part of the East Bank Partnership, UCL, LCF, University of East London, Loughborough. They're offering an amazing array of courses that if we can get East London young people plugged into that as a series of opportunities, that is huge. And then from there, as you're saying, Amanda, that our institutions should be deploying those really kind of, deeply kind of talented East London young people in our institutions. And I think we create an ecology, we create pathways through our institutions that mean that they can thrive and we can thrive. And I think there's the potential for that, and that will come about, I think, tiny bits of funding, but mainly through kind of sitting down and really thinking about how we better collaborate.
So can I just confirm, is that your one big thing, or you're going to off your commitment?
That's probably enough probably for me. But
Nadia?
I think, as I said, it would be through the art that we start to make change. But just to add on to Amanda's thing about getting people working in the actual buildings, I find that even in a very diverse and left-leaning and radical place like Theatre Royal Stratford East, that when we're talking about global majority, when we're talking about certain communities, you find them not in the middle and senior management and board level. Right? So if you want to make proper change, it's about bringing people in on all levels of an organisation, not just front of house or on the bar, or, it's about real change.
It's that retention and promotion as well as the recruitment, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right.
That would be mine.
Oh. Have you finished?
No, I have thought of one that I'd love to.
Okay, come on, throw out your big thing.
No, I sit and I listen. I just feel so kind of uplifted by this, and I do think the power of this is an opportunity, but also the power of this as a collaboration. That I think if we can sing as one and actually begin to use the beautiful message and the kind of collaborative, accumulated kind of power of us working together as something that we can go to some big funders, to government, and begin to talk about how the funding to this area as a strategic priority really does need to be considered. And I think the potential of Newham, of East London, as a kind of engine for transformation with the right amount of funding and strategically placed, I think could be unlocked with not what wouldn't be a huge amount of money from local and national government.
Well, I think you have all been very...
Can I just follow on?
Only because I need to go to the audience, but go quickly in.
But, we talk about collaboration, but genuine collaboration, I think, is just important to recognise that it is about knowledge sharing, but it's also about power sharing. If we really want to give everyone a chance to fulfil their potential, none of this will work without trust and generosity. And, we need to recognise that approaches need to be informed. They need to combine that sharing of knowledge, understanding goals and agendas. And I think that goes to a lot of what has been said around working cross-sectorally as well as within the arts and cultural ecosystem.
Thank you very much. Now I'm going to stop you. I think I'm glad that we got more Winnie the Pooh than Eeyore on our conversations, because I think it's meant that you have been radical, you've been participatory, and you've been creative. So things look good. I'm going to turn to our audience now and allow them the opportunity to ask questions. If we start with the gentleman at the front first, hands up, and then behind you.
Yeah, hi, thank you for your contributions. Now, there have been quite a few examples of places that have already been made, but not really for the community or the people that they were consulted for. And artists and architects have been used to kind of sell visions to kids, have workshops, to ensure that they sign or agree to the demolition of their homes for a brand new future. these beautiful buildings, less green space. But in reality, it comes down to almost social cleansing, and even bringing like race and class into it. You're seeing these all over London, not just London, UK as well, where when you go back 10, 15 years later and try and find these kids, they're not there. So it's important that art isn't used as a way to like erase communities, which has been happening. And there's a lot of anger. You're talking about trust. There's a lot of distrust because afterwards people, they're not there anymore.
And do you have a specific question, or was that the comment you just wanted to share?
Well, there are examples of places which have been, arts have been used to erase places. So, for example, if there's a building that is about to be regenerated, there's graffiti on it. It's almost like a New York situation. And yeah, fine, for a few months there's art, but that's just a precursor for demolition.
Would you like to, Amanda, you look like you want to respond to that, do you? Pass the mic. Thank you. Thank you for the comment.
So yes, I would say for every... No, and I totally understand. And for every Peckham, because Peckham is going through that gentrification process, there's the development of Liverpool Dockside, which is very different from Liverpool of old, but is very much of and by and with the community. So there is a tension, isn't there, with change and how things change and who leaves when things change. But I don't think it's necessarily the case that when you develop an area, you lose all of the culture. And I think that's what we're talking to, that we're in a really active place to go, how do we hang on to the bits that are East London? You know, as I said, I'm East London born and bred, right? And I recognise the bits and I don't recognise the bits, but I can still feel and see and understand the essence of what is East London. So I think that's a really valid point. I don't think it's a done deal. I think for every place that you've got where there's erasure or a threat of it, there's also examples where they've worked with. And it is the collaboration piece, I think.
Can I just add something? I think it's something also about when we talk about the role of artists or creative practitioners. You know, there was a comment that quite a prominent organisation made about how they don't know how their staff work at their institution when the sector doesn't necessarily pay them enough with the cost of living crisis and living in London, etc. And to me, what that spoke volumes of is that it's the people that can afford to have those jobs. And we have to work together to ensure that people are not just paid better, but actually we think about how much income we unlock for our creative practitioners. If they are the voices for us, for the communities, if they're the ones that are going to be revitalising the high streets, that are going to be engaging with the communities, they need to be representative of the communities in which we try to reach. And they need to be able to earn from their creativity so that they're not just, you know, surviving for a while and dropping off, but they're thriving, and we start to hear their voices so that then the voices from the communities are getting heard on a social, cultural and economic level.
Thank you. I'm going to take a question that came in, and then there's a lady at the back, just behind you, that will come to you. I'll ask this question first so that we have people that are watching feel they're participating, and it's to Gus and Nadia. And the question was, how can artists and cultural organisations work to reconcile such polarised views? The blackout night at Theatre Royal Stratford East is just one of many examples of the culture wars. How do we move forward and blend tradition, or brackets, or better history, and much needed social change?
How do we do? Well, we do it by a breadth of work. So we programme as a theatre with new writing. It's always been a theatre that's very left-leaning. You know, the first theatre to put working class stories on stage, black stories on stage. But we have a real breadth of work, from really old plays like August Wilson and Shakespeare right to new work. So it's about diversity of programming. But obviously, I hope we're not going to enter a world that doesn't have space for two different opinions to coexist. So, for example, with Blackout Night, I understand not everybody's going to get it or sign up to it, but that's why it's one night and there's a whole other host of evenings to enjoy the show, and evenings that are around relaxed performances or BSL interpreted performances and so on and so forth. So I think, we've always programmed to reflect the community, both on stage and the people that work at our theatre. So this, there's not usually conflict. This is quite rare, but we're not going to not do work or say things and, stop experimentation and freedom of speech. That's not what art is about. But we always include the community because the community are our theatre. Our head of box office started working there at 15 years old. She's in her 40s. Her daughter is on the television as a famous actor. She started on our youth theatre. She still works the bar. We are very connected with our community. We understand them and we are them.
Those are beautiful stories.
That's my...
I think this is what... I think this is what engaged and healthy arts institutions are really for, is that we should be spaces, particularly in democracies, within which we can have contentious and contrasting views, but we can, as arts institutions, that we can create the atmosphere within which we can engage with people who don't necessarily agree with us, but do it with respect. And I think, in a democracy, these things are pretty much critical, that they underwrite the basis upon which we can actually go about our business. And so the arts, particularly in periods when we are feeling more polarized, within which the political discourse feels a little bit, fractured and like it's breaking down, the arts have a really important role in actually being a space for multiple voices and being a space within which we can have disagreements, but we can actually engage in dealing with difference in a decent and open way. And I think, that's one of the things I think that that we should really absolutely embrace, and at this time feel absolutely that needs to be a core of any public institution's responsibilities.
Thank you, Gus. Have you got the mic? Yes. And then we'll go to the back there. Thank you.
I wanted to come back to Sanaz's point around power, which I think is a really interesting one, and especially because you're all describing ways in which communities are really involved in how you guys create the culture and the programs that you do. And I think it's often kind of that idea of co-creation and bringing people in is a really big one, and especially Newham as well. But it's also one where quite often it becomes an overrated term, where people say, yes, we're co-creating, and actually what's really happening is a consultation process where you kind of judge whether you like the answer, and if you don't listen to it. And so I kind of wondered, in your organisations, what has been the learning that you've learned from the projects that you've done that overcame those barriers, and where you could really listen to people and genuinely create space for people to actually have a say, even if maybe your board or your funder or someone who helped you shape the projects wanted you to stick to structures that maybe didn't allow for that space. How did you overcome those barriers to still create that space for people's voices in there? It's a question to everyone, really.
And I kind of want to come back to your point as well, because I feel like I've half answered it. But there is a project going on, a crafts project, which obviously it depends on the art form, but I'm really impressed with this one, where the research team are committed to making craft alongside the community they want to talk to and draw out data from. So it's an experiential research piece, which obviously may not work in all forms, but the important piece of it is they're sitting alongside and they're taking these conversations as they come, and they're not going, would you like red, green or yellow carpets? They're going, so what do you think of carpets? And it's all flowing from that. So the first thing from that is the experience. How can you drop yourself in it and be alongside? But the second piece is it works best when it's not in answer to a question. It's an ongoing dialogue where the conversation pulls out and others act on. So that for me is a piece about how you empower that community, you know, that your researchers in this case act as a voice piece for that community, but it is embedded in the process. And I just wanted to come back to say, you know, some of what you've talked about is about affordable homes, affordable workspaces, living accommodation, working accommodation, and all of that stuff I feel is very much, I mean, I'm sure all of you can speak to that in terms of what's going on in Newham anyway. But yeah, that is definitely in the mix, as it were. Nobody's not thought of that. Is that helpful?
I mean, is it right? At Rosetta Arts, you know, it's in our DNA, diversity and inclusion. But often, and whilst we, even pre-COVID, we would have at any one time 6 or 7 satellite hubs outside of our main venue. And we would sometimes spend years working with certain residents or communities before they've even set foot at Rosetta Arts. We only ever, even pre-COVID, delivered 50% of our work in our centre because we recognised that we need to be in the, and alluding back to your point about safe spaces, we need to be in the places that people ordinarily are, with the gatekeepers of those communities who they are familiar with. And they would be working with our artists, educators, and not even realise that they're working with Rosetta Arts. And this could be in a library, in a GP practice, in a town hall, in the park, you know, and recognising the journey that people need to go on to start to develop the relationship and really thinking, you know, who are the right artists to be here representing? What are the things that people actually want to do? And working with the gatekeepers of those communities, it's been incredibly important, but also everyone who delivers the work for Rosetta comes from the community and they're empathetic to the community.
But is there, I mean, it came up earlier, is there a conversation or some thought to be had about value and what's seen as valuable art and what's invested in long term?
Yeah,
here?
I mean, often
that's where you get
I
the money from.
Money and time and love, because you can silo your participation, you're working with communities and young people as an extra thing you do on the side. But really, it takes more time, more money, more love, more investment. And there's different ways of doing it. We all probably do it in 100 different ways. But the best art has been when both things come together. We did a play, you know, an opera, and everyone went, oh, opera in the East End. Who, you know, that doesn't feel right. That feels like it should be, you know, at the Royal Opera House or the E&O. And we did an opera, which was seen as high art in our East End theatre with 200 school children. And it was a really moving, beautiful, meaningful experience that also won an Olivier Award. I mean, it worked on every single level in that way. So I think, in my experience as a producer and maker of work, the best work has been when those two things collide, like professional artists and the community coming together to make a piece of work. I don't think it's the only model of working together, though. And I think we need all of these flavours to make something interesting.
There was a question at the back.
Yeah, hi, hello. I just want to say, first of all, thank you to the panel. Very exciting conversation. My name is Kezia. I'm an interdisciplinary artist who's from London, but is now based in Liverpool, which is a whole other conversation. But I've had the pleasure of working with Nadia before, and the V&A is my favourite museum. My question is kind of following on from the last online question. We've talked a lot about engaging with the government and with politicians. But I think given what happened with Stratford and also my own personal experiences, I have a growing concern also around the impact of media. And I just wondered if anyone wanted to speak to that in terms of the impact of not just, you know, newspapers and tabloids and stuff, but social media, Twitter, and how that intersects with the arts. How it could cause either a barrier for how we go forward in change or how we could use it to our advantage. I think also because we've talked about generational differences, younger people, it's a very, very different kind of, what's the word? environment and platform, I suppose, than what I even was used to growing up, but that I've had to almost adapt to, and I'm still struggling with. But it's something that we can't kind of ignore. So I just wanted to know if anyone had any thoughts on that.
It's an interesting concept. Thank you for that question. Bob?
Well, I was thinking about what you were saying, and I think it's allied to what you're saying in a way, and that, art is a thing. There's good art and there's terrible art. And go to an art fair, you'll see acres of ghastly art designed to be sold to oligarchs, designed to fly off to Saudi Arabia, to be cherished by somebody you wouldn't want to have dinner with. Art is art, but art is what you're saying. It is the lipstick on the gorilla of development, and it can be frightening and ghastly. But what we're aspiring to is to make great projects and to get people's voices being heard loud and proud. And what would be a disaster is if we are diverted from that practice by media, if you like, by people who want to use wedge issues. Let's understand what a wedge issue is. It's cheap media for broadcasters who want to gain an audience but don't want to invest in looking at an argument properly. If we get diverted by that sort of thing, if we make great work and be honest and serious and understand that we're in an evolutionary environment, half of this bit of Newham didn't exist 10 years ago. So what the community is a developmental thing. And the wonderful thing about the VNA and Sadler's Wells and all of these organisations is that they're going to be part of forming that new story about this new community. And how we all live together. So I don't, though everybody, I get wheeled out to say art is good, but art is and I believe absolutely profoundly that art is good, but one has to understand what art is and understand it in a proper and grown-up way.
But she's got a really good point that you can't ignore it, can you? The reality is, for you to get wheeled out, the media has to wheel you out, and you would need to know how to work with the media. And Nadia is currently dealing with the impact of social media and Twitter.
I think Amanda alluded to it right at the beginning, that we need to advocate for ourselves. We've got to infect everyone with our enthusiasm for what art can be, but the only way we can do it is through the art. That's the problem, and all the opportunity.
Because that's not, we see that as our role, to champion on your behalf.
We could engage in Twitter wars or all of that, but it's so reductive, and the only way, I don't know. There's probably some really cool artists that are engaging in all of that and bringing all of it together. But it's like, how do we tell people that when you sit in a theatre, all your heartbeats intertwine with the people on stage? On a physiological level, theatre is creating change in the room. It's deep. The Greeks made their citizens watch plays to create empathy. We need empathy to understand each other and have a quality of life. How do we infect people with that enthusiasm and knowledge? We have to do it as artists.
But as a journalist, as a correspondent, what got me out of bed was allowing you the platform, or finding the platform for you to be able to do that. I always saw myself as a champion of what you do.
And that's the good bit, but there's an evil bit too.
There is the evil bit, so you can't ignore the evil bit, though, can you?
No, you can't.
Even when I was doing my work, I had to think, right, who's the editor today? Who's the producer? What's their value system? Do they prefer opera or do they prefer popular work? So there is always a gatekeeper, and she's right. It's hard to ignore.
True.
Reality bites.
Yeah.
Oh, if only people could be the gatekeeper. We have another question over this side. Thank you. Okay, we take that question here, please.
Hi, my name's Tessa. I'm Director of Music in Offices. My question, this does sound really exciting, and I think there's a lot of rapid change obviously happening, which gives a lot of hope. But you've all used the word radical a number of times to describe ideas and activities and workshops, which I'm sure a lot of the outputs are very radical. But I wondered what will be radical about your approach and process to collaboration to really create a radical legacy, and what radical means to you here in Newham.
So a deep dive in how you're all going to work together as one happy family. The floor is yours.
I mean, at the moment, as with my hat on as the chair of Creative Newham, and there are some wonderful Creative Newham members in the audience today. One of the things that we're doing is we are leading a cultural producers program, recognising the role that producers have in the intersection between the artists, the arts organisations, the clients or funders, and the communities and residents. And knowing that if we can start to develop a talent pipeline of cultural producers that are from Newham and East London, that we can start to see work being produced that really meets the needs and interests of the communities in which we're trying to reach. And we cannot do that on our own. In order to really make a step change in Newham, we need to, all of us, work together to make it happen. And it's not just the arts organisations. We have universities, we have businesses, all involved in this programme. And it's a 10-year vision for the borough. So this is something that we're doing, and it's being led by a relatively small organisation around the table. But that's important because the relationships are with us, the existing organisations that are in the borough.
One person can start a revolution?
Yeah, I think for us, radical means revolutionary. It means political. It means giving working class people agency. And we're not a little bit sick in our mouth when we say revolution. We mean it. But we're allowed to do that as Theatre Hall Stratford East. Our founding mother was a revolutionary. So yeah, when I say radical, I mean radical. I don't mean graphic design. With graphic design.
My understanding, or my thought about how one kind of might apply the word radical in terms of what we are delivering, is that I feel really kind of fortunate to be working with one of the world's great collections, and the bit of the V&A collection that V&A East will have custodianship over is a section of the collection that was previously at Blythe House. And Blythe House, any of you who visited will know that it was a space that was generally only visited by academics and museum specialists. And what we will be able to do with the opening of our collection centre here in East London is to completely change that. That this will be a space within which anyone can come and feel welcome. And what we want, working with our conservation and curatorial team to make sure that is underwritten by the understanding that unless there is a specific reason, all of the objects can be handled, can be worked with, can be that these can be engaged with. That we want to completely transform the paradigm for collection centres, and this has completely unheard of within our sector, that we have objects which are 5,000 years old, some of which are enormously kind of fragile, but we are working with our curators to completely transform the paradigm. The hope is that we can have the sense that this is not just an open space that offers universal access, but that access feels like it is dynamically yours. And as part of that process, we want to then take those objects into schools in East London so that before we open, every single secondary school will be able to engage with our collections, and I mean in handling those collections. And these are objects, some of which are enormously valuable in terms of, of their age or in terms of the materials that they're constructed with. And so these are things which a generation ago, if you were to say that you were thinking of them, that people would think, that would be impossible. But, I feel really proud that in the last kind of couple of years that we've negotiated and we've created the models for that to be delivered.
Thank you very much. Well, I think our ambition was to take a positive look at the role that East Bank can play in regeneration and putting people at the heart of it. I hope you, like me, think our panel have done a very good job in terms of doing that in the short space of time. You're desperate to answer one question. Can you just allow me? We've got one more question. Is that okay? One more, I've been told strictly.
Is this on here?
Yes.
Hello, I'm Veronica, and I'm absolutely thrilled to hear what you've been saying. I'm founder of Arts for Dementia, and when I visited the Olympic Park earlier this week, it was really thrilling to see all your buildings going up. And what I would love to say to all of you is, do think of older people at the onset of potential dementia. They don't want to go into reminiscence. They want the transformative opportunities that you're giving them. Yeah. And I'd love to come and talk to each and all of you about a very exciting project with UCL. I think that what you're doing is so thrilling. It's really uplifting, and it's the most exciting that we've ever had, I think. And if older people can share that too and feel young and engaged and part of what you're doing, especially the V&A, and all of your organisations, it would be absolutely fabulous.
I would love to collaborate with you, and thank you so much for ending with such an uplifting statement. Thank you.
No, I was going to mirror that same, because we are running out of time, and someone's doing a significant birthday. I may be joining you very soon, but I want... Is your on a not so positive. We'll carry that into the drink, shall we, Patricia? Once again, all I wanted to say is a huge thank you to our panel for your thoughts, your insights, and your vision and ambition. So can you help me, audience, in giving a round of applause to our audience? And equally, we'd like to thank you for your participation. So, panel, do your thing. Congratulations. So thank you all very much. I hope that has been insightful and helpful. And long may East Bank live. Thank you very much.